There was a monk debate north of the border in Toronto, the famous monk debates. They got Douglas Murray back to debate Medy Hassan and Gideon Levy. The resolution in question was Zionism, anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. And so it's obvious which side Douglas Murray's on, obvious which side Medy Hassan was arguing. Medy's debate partner was an Israeli journalist, a non-Zionist Israeli journalist named Gideon Levy, who did a remarkable job in this debate. Now, they lost, of course, which we'll get to in the next segment here. But for purposes of this piece, I want to show you guys one of the most telling exchanges of this debate, in my opinion, because I watched the whole thing, was a question about student protests. So here the question goes to Douglas Murray, what to make of the pro-Palestine student protests, and here's his answer, and then we'll get the rebuttal.
Does college campuses and what's happening on college campuses here in North America, Douglas, say about this debate right now?
Well, it says that a young generation has been lied to in significant numbers and with a sense of ferocity and extremism, which we should all abhor.
I'm sorry, this guy sounds just like Hannibal Lecter. He really sounds like Hannibal Lecter. Well, Clarice, of course, it's anti-Semitic, Clarice.
Well, he's
Have you
really
ever found yourself on the receiving end of reverse racism, Clarice? This guy sounds like fucking Hannibal Lecter. He sounds exactly like him if you close your eyes. He could be, animated version of Silence of the Lambs. If Anthony Hopkins can't do it because he's too old, this guy would nail it.
How do you feel about settler colonial projects, Clarice?
Exactly, yes. Yeah.
Well, he's really trying to be William F. Buckley.
Yes. Yes, we've made that point in the past, and that's certainly true.
I mean, it's possible that these college campus kids didn't get the memo from the other side in their desperate attempt not only to reframe anti-Zionism, but also anti-Semitism. It's very strange to me, isn't it, that if anti-Zionism isn't anti-Semitic, why do all these kids who've never protested about anything else before in the world stage suddenly turn up at Columbia and chase Jewish students with "Go back to Poland" or Ukraine? Why is it Jewish students at universities here in Toronto and Montreal who get chased by mobs and shouted down by mobs screaming anti-Semitic slurs? They're not even bothering to cover over.
Okay. Again, citation needed for that. What are you talking about?
Yeah,
They
just pull this stuff out of their asses.
The entire media is on the same page that Jewish students are being harassed on campus, yet we're seeing no footage of this whatsoever. No documented reports of this whatsoever.
That girl almost lost her eye, no?
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. You got girls saying we were stabbed in the eye when video shows at best she was accidentally poked in the eye with the end of a flag because there were marchers marching through a tight corner, right? So what are you talking about? Number one. Number two, you know what you never seen students protest before? Israel. The opposition makes that point brilliantly, so I won't step on that. But that's something that we want to keep in mind here as well.
I mean, they very rarely anymore remember to say, "Oh, I meant Zionist." They're revealing themselves all the time, and it's because...
Where?
First of all, they've been lied to.
Where are they revealing themselves? Yeah, again, where's the video for this?
My experience is protesters are extremely careful because they know everyone's dying to get them on camera saying something anti-Semitic. They're very careful not to make that equation. Not to say Jews, but to say Zionists, Israel.
This is the version of Rachel Maddow saying that the Bernie supporters threw chairs at the Nevada State Convention and showing no footage of that. They cut to WWE B-roll because they had nothing on camera. They had a lot of camera footage that day, but none corroborating her story. Right. So again, where are the examples of this happening? Where? Because we know they would be everywhere if they happened.
You have what Max and Aaron exposed. You had the person who had like the sign about they should bomb the Zionists, who may very well have been a plant.
Almost
doesn't seem like there's ever been any follow up on that person, and they'd love to dox them.
Well, they were there alone, and they were asked not to hold the sign.
Right.
So those are
Exactly.
two huge red flags.
Those are like the only two things I've seen. Now, am I going to say, oh, nothing else has happened? Sure, man. I mean, you're talking about protests involving millions of fucking people.
Right.
Of course something like that's going to happen, but I've been to these protests. Is that common? Not at all. Just like when you had a Sanders rally, you generally would not have heard Hillary is a bitch because everybody knew they wanted to get you saying that on camera.
They wanted to hear you say that. Exactly. And if you notice, look at how many notes he has on him. He has a whole book of notes. He has papers under the water pitcher there. He referred to notes the whole time. Notice he didn't have specific examples to cite what he's talking about right now. Doesn't read off, and there was this incident at the University of X. Nothing. Just makes these claims and moves right on.
Secondly, there are a very large number of them who are, I would say that they fall into two categories, the sinister and the silly. The sinister are the ones who know exactly which river they're chanting about and exactly which sea. And they want the eradication of the world's only Jewish state. And they think they're the good guys. The silly.
All right, but before we move on from that, you know who also knows exactly which river and exactly which sea? Israel, the Zionists. From the river to the sea, the Zionists coined that phrase to describe their plans to ethnically purge that land of the Palestinians. So
Well,
yes,
and
go ahead.
well, and at core, this is where this whole argument is just crazy. They are the invaders.
Right.
They are the invaders. Douglas Murray, I think Hassan mentioned this at one point. Murray is one of the Dawkins New Atheist people.
Right.
You don't believe that God gave this land to the Jews.
Right.
So
He's an atheist.
what are you talking about that they have ancestry there thousands of years? So do the Palestinians. In fact, it is illegal to get a DNA test in Israel. You have to get a court order. You have to get permission for it. It has to be about paternity, that kind of thing. You have to go to court for that. Why? Because the Palestinians, in much greater proportions, are Jews. Like if you want to find the historic Hebrews, they're the Palestinians.
Right.
They stayed.
Yes.
First
The
they
bloodline.
converted to Christianity. Later they converted to Islam. They're the Jews. These Jews who came in from Eastern Europe, they may be Khazars. That's a theory. But I've had a DNA test. Not a fucking drop of Middle Eastern blood came up in my DNA. I'm sure that's the case with 99.999% of Ashkenazi Jews. The only exceptions would probably be the ones who have some Sephardic blood, which are the darker Jews.
Right.
They're the ones who, like, there was a guy at Columbia who started this academic year calling for climate emergency. And then
so the first were the sinister ones who knew what they were doing, and now these are the silly ones in his mind.
They're the ones who, like, there was a guy at Columbia who started this academic year calling for climate emergency. And then Hamas attacked Israel, and suddenly he was for Hamas. He has a sort of belly button piercing, and I think he's queers for Palestine, or, as I say, chickens for KFC. And these students are, I'll put it straight, they are desperate for a cause. They're desperate for meaning in their lives. They have searched and scoured the land looking for meaning and purpose, and instead of learning something good to do with their lives, they've decided they will do this incredibly simplistic thing. Everything in the world is oppressor, oppressed, occupier, occupied.
No, not everything in the world is oppressor, oppressed, occupier, occupied. But those terms do specifically apply to this situation, which is why they're protesting this and not other random causes, which you accused him 2 minutes ago. Well, they weren't protesting anything before. Now he contradicts himself. Notice he says, well, they were protesting, other things, and now this is the cause du jour. But this is what Brianna Joy Gray told us when we were on her show. We would like to have gotten into this more on our show, but it was not to be.
Yeah.
It was not to be. No, actually, these terms, oppressor and oppressed, occupier, occupied, they do apply. They do apply.
Yes.
And this is the anti-woke grift. Oh, these are just woke people with fucking pierced navels
That's it.
who think that there's a such thing as oppression an occupation. If you think that exists in real life, it's because you have too many piercings and you're
Crazy
too woke.
talk.
Yeah.
That is exactly what I was going to say watching this. It's giving me flashbacks. The douchebag dialogues was 2 days of this.
Yep.
This is exactly what it was sitting through those panels and those conferences. It was the same exact smug, condescending, absolute assurance in one's superiority, and that superiority being rooted in the idea, which Murray himself, I read one of his books, he denies that he's a Western chauvinist,
Right.
simply arguing that Western culture shouldn't be thrown out or denigrated, and all cultures have done horrible things, and that's a point of view I agree with. But no, actually, you are a Western supremacist, and you've proved it since October 7th. All these people did. They all said that. They all said, no, we're not saying we're Western. No, yes, you are. Yes, you are. Just because some people who, going back to the last segment, yeah, there are people who grift off this stuff. There are people who have very misguided ideas. There are people who are using a lot of ideas about colonization and oppression as a way to deflect from personal, emotional, psychological problems or personal failings. You know who else that's true of? Pretty much the entire spectrum of political engagement.
Right.
I don't think there's any sector of people involved in politics that don't have a certain number of people like that, who are using politics as a cover-up for deep-rooted psychological issues, or as a way to deflect from personal failings, or as a way to gain power over others. I can't think of a political ideology I can't say that about. So certainly you have people, and I've spoken out against them, but that doesn't mean that these core ideas are wrong. And as I said, from October 8th, pretty much, the very first article I wrote about this right after, this created cognitive dissonance for those amongst these kids who actually thought it meant something. The best of them are the ones who are going out there and protesting because they had been lulled into this fairy tale that these universities, that these institutions, that these media celebrities cared about white supremacy. And then in the event, it turned out none of them did. And the best of them took it to heart and have been out there fighting those institutions ever since. And it's an open question what this does to their perspective on those institutions long term.
Sure thing. All right, we're going to let him finish, and then we're going to go to Medy and Mr. Levy's rebuttal.
Colonizer, colonized. And this incredibly simplistic idea that works nowhere, they then implant or try to implant over the world's most complex region. And they think in doing so that they're being good guys. And what they don't realize is that if they got what they wanted, they'd have finished the work of Adolf Hitler.
Perfect. Well, sounds like something. All right.
Everything goes back to Hitler.
No,
what is that? Godwin's law?
Yeah, exactly.
If you argue long enough, everything goes back to Hitler.
All right, so they go into... So now I'm going to play Medy Hassan's response, part of his response, because Medy Hassan gets a bit repetitive. But then we're going to go to Gideon Levy's response after that. So we'll play this with minimal interruption, because this is really good, especially Levy.
Douglas earlier was telling us all about the importance of journalism going on the ground. While Douglas was getting awards from the President of Israel, we were actually reporting, my news organization Zeteo, from those campuses with Jewish students. In fact, the most read piece on our site is from a student called Jonathan Ben Menachem, who is at Columbia and reported from inside the encampment where they were having a Seder, where he was protesting war crimes in Gaza, which I know the other side thinks there are no war crimes, everything we just imagined the last 8 months. What you have to tackle tonight, I'm glad we brought up college campuses, because again, if this ridiculous sweeping motion, Douglas says complexity, we are the side of complexity, we're not the ones saying anti-Zionism across the board is anti-Semitism, you have to deal with the fact that college protests are disproportionate. There are a disproportionate number of Jews in these protests. They're all brainwashed, they're all idiots, they're all self-haters. Some of the top academics at Columbia University who are Jewish have come out to defend the protests. Annalise Orlek is a 65-year-old former chair of Jewish studies at Dartmouth. She was beaten on camera by police while she was protesting against the war in Gaza. Apparently Douglas, an atheist, says that she's an anti-Semite. That's the debate, that's what we've got to tonight, where the former chair of Jewish studies at Dartmouth is an anti-Semite, while Douglas is the champion of the Jewish people. I find it bizarre.
I want to...
Okay, so that was part of his response. Pretty obvious stuff, but well put. And, now 8 months after, whatever you think of this guy, we're not fans. I mean, he is a careerist and, an opportunist. But it's very obvious now why he's not on MSNBC. Like, it's very, very obvious now why he is a freelancer once again. All right, so
it's him on this issue. It's been a good example of what we've been talking about. Hey, take your allies where you find them. I'll fight shoulder to shoulder with Medy Hassan on this issue.
Yeah, of course.
I think he means it. I don't feel like he's doing it for advantage. The smart play would have been to shut up about this.
Yeah, well, it wasn't for advantage. No. I mean, he got fired for it, for sure. All right, now here's Gideon Levy. So here's an Israeli Jew who makes a great point, because the question of this debate is anti-Zionism, anti-Semitism, and of course Douglas Murray's formulation there is that the college protesters must be motivated by anti-Semitism because they weren't out protesting XYZ cause until now. This is really, really good stuff here.
Jewish people, I find it bizarre.
I want to a little bit calm down and speak for a moment about anti-Semitism. Where were the anti-Semites and the campuses when Israel went for peace in the Oslo years? How come that the world hugged Israel then? From coast to coast, from continent to continent, campuses and others hugged Israel because Israel went for peace. Now when we look backwards, obviously we see it was a kind of a trap, but let's put it aside. Where was anti-Semitism then? What, anti-Semitism went to sleep when Israel is doing the right thing? Anti-Semitism goes to sleep when Israel is following the international law? Anti-Semitism goes to sleep when Israel is following the resolutions of all the international institutions? It just wakes up if Israel doesn't? So if so, let's ask ourselves, what is the contribution of Israel's policy to the increase of anti-Semitism in the world?
Good point. When Israel gestured toward peace, however you evaluate those gestures with the privilege of hindsight, it's a different question. Why weren't they protesting them then? Why did they wait until they broke international law in this most egregious, most recent example? Like, if they hated Israel and they hated Jews, they'd be out protesting Israel no matter what they do, because that's what you do if you hate a group of people. Why is it, if they're motivated by anti-Semitism, did they wait until they committed a genocide in broad daylight to go out and protest them? That pretty much dismantles the whole argument right there. That was a point kind of hidden in plain sight the whole time, and good on him for recognizing that. Yeah,
exactly. It was one of those, why didn't anyone say that before? Yes.
Yeah, right. Yes, exactly. Right. The fact that they only went out and protested Israel when they committed a genocide is proof positive they did not hate them all along. That this is based on their actions, not who they are. And then he goes on.
There is anti-Semitism in the world. It should be fought without any compromises, no doubt about this. But the manipulation of Israel to label any criticism as anti-Semitism makes a damage to the fight against anti-Semitism. Because the genuine anti-Semitism we should fight. But the critics of Israel, part of them are anti-Semites, part of them are using what's happening to express anti-Semitism. And part of them, let me tell you, a big part of them, are people of conscience, are people that not only have the right to criticize Israel, they have the duty to do so.
Okay, Gideon, that's it.
Very well done. Very well said.
And absolutely. And just speaking to what he's saying, certainly we've experienced that, where you get these anti-Semites who have wandered onto our channel, or when we've guest hosted over at Jimmy's, thinking, yeah, now those are some Jews I can deal with, some Jew-hating kind of Jews. Tell me more about them Jew tunnels, boys. Like, yeah, sure, man. You got these people who are using the battle against Zionism as a way to insert their anti-Semitism, or as a vehicle for their anti-Semitism. Absolutely, those people exist.
But that's a very small minority. Yeah.
It is an extremely small minority of the movement, as evidenced by the fact that there are so many Jews involved in that movement. Matt, God, outside of what? David Pakman? Is there any other Jew, using the term left extremely broadly, doing commentary who's not anti-Zionist? Who has not taken a pro-Palestine position?
Well, there's that
besides
2IT
Pakman?
guy, Ben Glebe, right? They had that big throwdown that we covered a while back. But that's those two are really the only ones I could think of.
All right, so that's a pretty funny ratio for an anti-Semitic movement.
Yeah. No, indeed, and that was just extremely well said. Levy was extremely impressive throughout this whole thing. Medy Hassan did pretty well too, but he made more of the obvious points. You know what I mean? And he did it well. But that was just extremely well done.
Please clap.